But I got to a point in my career where I'd been solving the same or very similar problems, and I was just bored to death of it.
Right.
You know? Like I'm normally someone who kind of leaps out of bed looking forward to the challenge of the day and really enthusiastic about it. Not kind of Anthony Robbins kind of enthusiastic, but in a Kiwi sense, you know, like pretty happy to be here and pretty happy to do what I'm doing. But what I realized over a G&T, looking over a lovely beach up north here in New Zealand, was that the part that I enjoyed the most out of what I was doing was always the time I spent with users, people who use the software, customers in front of it, and understanding what that experience was like.
Welcome to the Melbourne Muse podcast. Melbourne arts and design, entrepreneurship, music, fashion, film, sports, gaming, and whatever's in between. We exist to showcase extraordinary people to inspire the next generation of creatives and leaders. My guest today is Brendan Jarvis, father, UX leader, podcaster, and managing founder of the UX Lab, The Space in Between. We talked about the impact of UX research and how we both have implemented artificial intelligence into our workflows. We touched on separating signal from noise, leadership, productivity, and more. If you're in the field of product design, this episode will be insightful for you. Brendan Jarvis, welcome to the Melbourne Muse podcast. How are you doing, brother?
I'm really well, Esty. Really pleased to be here.
Nice. Man, I'm so glad to have you here because, first of all, I didn't expect to have you as one of my first guests. I knew that you will be a guest one day, but I didn't know that would be this early. And I think that speaks to your personality, your humbleness. I don't know if you remember, but when we met at a usability testing course or something like that. And I remember when you have to introduce yourself. I remember you said something like, I'm here because I always know that there's something else to learn. You, of course, were across most of the things that we learn, but there was something there that, for whatever reason, you were going to learn something new. And that clicked with me because that was my attitude going in. I was sort of the same position where I've been through the courses like that. And I kind of knew that everything that we were going to touch, kind of knew a little bit of. Mm-hmm. But I knew that just being in that room with people that are going to, going to learn something new will trigger something new on me as well. And so that's when we connected, I think. I was like, okay, this guy is on. And again, it just speaks of your humbleness. So thank you for being here. All that to say, thank you for being here and thank you for being so humble. The first thing I want to talk to you about is I got this from the space in between, and I want to start with the impact of UX research. Especially, it says here, we're on a mission to shape better user experiences through practical, accurate, and impartial insights, conveyed holistically to give enterprise teams the clarity and confidence to act collaboratively. I thought that was brilliant. And I would like to start with that. How do you shape better user experiences through the space in between for enterprise users? I would like to start with that because that really excites me because I'm in a B2B space and now in a position where I need to think more holistically, like we were just talking before about that. So I would like to know from your perspective, walk us through that impact.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that I think is really endemic in our industry is that we're all so busy making software, whether it's the design of the software or whether it's the development of the software or whether it's managing the product, if you're a product manager. Yeah. And what that means is that often the people that we're doing that for are somewhat secondary to what it is that we're paying attention to in our day-to-day. So one of the ways that we help enterprise teams to create better user experiences is really quite simple. It's to bring all those people together from those different roles and actually show them what it's like. It sounds crazy, but show them what it's like for a customer to use their software. And that is one of and it's very simple, it's been talked about for decades, but that is one of the most effective ways to turn on those light bulbs in people's minds, to show them that all the effort that they're putting in is for naught if people can't figure out simple things in their product. So a lot of what we do is around alignment. It's around bringing people together in the same space, whether it's virtual or physical at the lab, and actually getting them to see and experience something together and not just be in their silos. So that's one of the ways that we do that.
Nice. So basically aligning through the vision, like workshops so everybody is on the same boat, everybody understands and empathizes in the same way. Now, let me ask you about, because here's the thing, when in companies like the ones I've been through, it's always a bit of a hurdle to try to fit in user research as part of the development process for a couple of reasons. But one of them is, of course, a lot of stakeholders don't see their return on the investment for that. Like, it's hard. Like they say, basically, we know what their business question is. We know how to solve it. We know what product they need. We can just start iterating on that and experimenting on it, right? But oftentimes that the whole research part gets skipped, and it's just kind of hard sometimes to justify it. From our perspective, sometimes they're saying, look, we actually need to front foot this with some research, figure out especially what they need, talk to them. I'm in an industry, which I've never been in this position before, but I'm in an industry where it's actually very hard to talk to users because it's the entertainment industry. And these people are people in Hollywood, and they are very time poor, but also they have this sort of attitude where, you know, I mean, I'm paying you, I just need you to deliver to me. And it's very hard for us to get to talk to them. We had success in other areas like Latin America. They are happy to talk to us, so we can get to actually get feedback from them and show them stuff that we're working on. But there are other areas where we struggle a lot. So going back to my original question, what do you think teams like Heart should do to justify the importance of that user research at the beginning of the stages?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's hard for people to run two parallel tracks in their mind, you know, one where we don't bring and involve users in our design process like you're talking about, and another where we do. You can't really do that, right? You've got to find something in a senior stakeholder or a CEO that connects with the message of putting product in front of people and can see the tangible benefit in doing that before you actually can demonstrate the financial benefit in doing that. There's got to be, I think, a kernel of belief in being human-centered, and that it's the right way to at least start to refine some of the thinking around the problem that you're there to solve. And I think show, not tell, is always the way that I would approach this. And people can blow up research to be something that is perhaps more intimidating or bigger than it needs to be, specifically when you're in the mode of trying to build belief in a particular direction or in a particular way of working. So if you're in a situation where you're not currently doing any user research, but you're a designer or even a product person, and you're thinking, we really do need to do some research here, there's some gold to be uncovered that we haven't yet found, then just start small. You know, you don't need to do a lot. You can do it yourself. You can run 1 or 2 or 3 sessions, put a product in front of people. They don't even have to necessarily be the specific audience that you're solving the problem for.
Yeah,
you know,
right, yeah.
If it's the problem space, 100%, you shouldn't be talking to people that aren't your customers about problems. But if we're talking about putting in front designs of people, I think Steve Krug in his book, Don't Make Me Think, or at least in some of his thinking since then, talked about not using the difficulty of finding the right people as an excuse not to do research.
Right.
You know, if you're talking about the design from a usability point of view or a connection to the way that the content is being framed, that actually might mean that you need to get people that are at least on the periphery of your industry. But you don't necessarily need to get that person, that persona 100% dialed in to get valid feedback.
100%. We do that how we do that is we do have we call a proxy user, which is we basically have inside of our team, we have people that do their job. So we use them to test, but there's always a bias, you know, and that's where we struggle with, because just to illustrate the point. So basically we work with people that the analysts of data. And of course we have people like that in our team because they go out there and try to sell the product as well. You know, show the capabilities, all these types of things. So that's how we use them. Of course, when we do develop a feature, they request features, all of that kind of stuff. But when it comes to the validation of the usability of a feature, of the actual need of that feature, oftentimes there is very biased because they will try to sell what matters to their client and therefore they're a little bit biased towards different things, and you can notice it. So that's why we struggle when we really want to talk to the actual user. But we do use that. We try to get away from, okay, this is a problem, we can't solve it. It's rather like, okay, let's use a proxy. We have proto-personas as well. But we're trying to avoid right now is because of that biased part.
I think this comes down to separating signal from noise.
Right.
And perhaps a little bit into the design of the session that's being conducted. I think the fact that you understand that there's a bias there for a start is a wonderful thing, because you can kind of cancel that out.
True.
In what you're looking at when you're playing back a session. There's a distinct difference between what people say and what they do, right? You would have seen this, right, in usability tests.
Of course.
You put some product in front of someone, they go through and they struggle with 90% of it, and then you ask them at the end, so how was your experience with the software today? And they say, oh, it was great. It was brilliant. I loved it. I didn't struggle. And you're like, I saw you struggle. Of course, you never say that. You're like, okay, that's great feedback. And I think that separating that signal from noise is really important when it comes to those kind of proto-personas, or the people that aren't quite the people that you want to speak for. Perhaps the way in which those sessions are designed as well, also to separate opinion from observed behavior.
Correct.
So I think you can still mine really relevant insights from the behavioral side of the product, and you can kind of discount or contextualize the opinion about what features might be good, which is, future focus, as opposed to in the present moment that you're there to observe.
That's true. We did do several different tests in regards to that, to try to, conduct the sessions in different ways to try to avoid that. But that's actually very good insight onto that. We talked about this ROI part as well. And actually, before we move on to the next point, do you have any examples? I would like to. Obviously, when you have an example, it's a lot easier to get the picture of clients that maybe you had where at the beginning they found quite a lot of friction into this. Like, they weren't really convinced this will have a lot of impact on their bottom line, on their product. That you can say, look, we turned this client around because here's what they found out. Do you have any examples of something like that happening?
Yes, I do. So a couple of years ago, we had one of the big banks here come and do a bunch of testing with us on some new journeys that they were working on. So this was in Figma, right? Like, these weren't actually polished products. And I think they had a lot of roadblocks internally. Right. Coordinating people in a bank, it's a really large organization. There's a lot of competing interests. People are busy, right? Just getting people's headspace is a huge thing. And so what we ended up helping them to do is, physically at the lab here in Wellington, we brought them together, people from the design team primarily, but there were people from engineering, there were people from product. And in a bank sense, product is the people that run, like the small business loans. That's the product for them, so not in a digital sense. Content writers. We brought senior stakeholders from risk and from legal together, and we ran a series of what we call rapid user testing workshops and sessions with customers. And they were all there together, and one of the benefits from that was they could all see what the problems were, and then we could immediately help them to unpack and integrate the perspectives that they held as to why things were problems. So after about 2 weeks, they were able to evolve that prototype 5 times. And that wasn't something that was ever going to be possible for them within the 4 walls of head office. It just doesn't happen.
It just doesn't happen.
They didn't have the facilities. They didn't have the will to do it on site. But there's something about going somewhere and doing something like special, right? You can bring people together. And off the back of that, what they ended up doing is creating their own lab facility within the bank.
Oh, wow.
In order to run these sessions more regularly. So if you want to, I suppose, understand the ROI, I don't have a dollar value for you, but I can tell you that they were able to garner enough support internally to actually create their own similar lab space so that they could do this kind of work more regularly. And so for me, that was a really positive cue or clue that the return was there for them being invested in the space together.
Right. That's interesting. We tried running those. Let me get some ideas from you. We tried running a lot of those sessions. Now, again, you're looking at a big bank, very different to how, for example, we work, because it's quite a small company. So we work on a lot of experimentation very quickly. And a lot of the times, because of that, we don't have the time to do, like 1 week is too much time. In 1 week, the first experiment has to be out. We have to be quite agile in that way. But I had run some sessions where I'm trying to get some alignment on some of the long-term goals, which you can sort of foresee. Okay, let's align all of engineering, all our stakeholders, design, everything, at least for this. And I try to run in those sessions. One thing I want to ask you, because you're an expert on this, is those sessions could easily get out of control, right? Because of ambiguity, because of people taking different paths and directions. Any tips from your end on how to focus those sessions on the actual objective and trying to avoid people going into different directions, which oftentimes those sessions could turn into be, I mean, I have many designer friends that struggle with this too, is that those sessions could potentially, sometimes you lock down and do a whole session, and at the back of it, it's just nothing conclusive came out. It's just a bunch of discussions, really. So I want to get some insights from you about tips to run those sessions more efficiently.
Of course, being really clear on the agenda up front is one of those tips. Whether or not people are going to stick to that is another, and that comes down to I suppose the art of managing conversation in groups, right? Facilitation,
yeah, 100%.
It's a completely different skill, and it's certainly one that I'm still working on. I'd like to point people to a company called Voltage Control. Okay. They have a number of really solid self-paced workshops on facilitation. One of them is called Magic Meetings.
Okay.
It's actually more about workshops than it is about meetings, but of course, Magic Workshops doesn't have that same ring. So I would point people to resources like that.
Okay.
I think that you also have to relax a little, and you have to be aware of your time frame that you've got to work within, but you should keep the outcome in mind. And if people start veering off in different directions, it's okay as long as you feel like you're still building to whatever that outcome you were there to achieve is. Now, that's a sensibility that you need to develop. Of course, you need to have the presence and the voice to be able to bring people back on track if they're getting off track. And some of those skills are things that you can only really practice in the moment, and you've got to get comfortable doing it.
Just got to do it.
Yeah.
Just got to keep doing it. Yeah, I agree 100% with that. Just got to practice. And again, you talked about meetings as well, but that's another one. Especially people working remote, people like teams like ours, where again time is critical, and sometimes meetings are just completely ineffective. You put the thing out front, like you said, this is the objectives, how you want to run the meeting, but that thing could just spiral out of control. Being able to manage that, I struggle with that a lot. Are
you putting time restrictions on certain activities that you're doing so everyone's clear on what the timings are?
No. Time. You mean like specifically, okay, we're going to talk about this is in this amount of time, we're going to talk about this? Is that what you mean?
You know, like on Miro or a Mural, for example, you've got the timer.
Oh, true.
So when you kick people into an activity, they know that they've got 5 minutes to do it.
Yes.
And so it's kind of objective in the sense that you're not the bad guy.
It's the timer.
The timer is.
That's actually a good point. We did do that with Miro sessions sometimes. But there are some wider sessions where we don't use that format, and that's not there. But yeah, it's a good point because you're not the bad guy anymore. You don't know what guy. Let's move on. You know, we have this thing called Elmo.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on.
Yeah.
So if somebody at some point something's getting out of track, just raise your hand and go, you know, Elmo, you know, this is not going anywhere. Let's just go back on track. But yeah, that's a good point, and definitely thank you for the resources as well on that front. Now let's go back to another thing I wanted to ask you, which is building the right products in the first place. So desirability testing is a big thing, and for us, for example, one thing we have is, let me give you some context. We have an incredible data set that could be applied in hundreds of different ways. So therefore, you can spin out different types of products. And it's about the experimentation and validation of, okay, how can we apply this to this particular industry to solve this particular business problem? And sometimes it's about, a problem that you often face is what product to build next. Because again, resources finite. You can't build everything. And building the right product in the right time is important. Sometimes you could be ahead of the curve. And that happened with in my opinion, that happened with Parrot, in that they were bringing this thing to the industry 5 years before anybody was talking about data, right? They were like, oh, look, there's this data. You can make decisions with this data. And people are like, what are you talking about? So it's a bit too early, but it was the way that you frame it and package it, right? All that to say, any tips on desirability testing, on figuring out what is the right product to build first?
It's really a part of the industry that I haven't done a lot in, but I have had a lot of conversations in product businesses, people that lead product businesses, and I've asked them a lot about this on my podcast. And one of the things that stuck with me is one of the CEOs said to me, when you're looking at what to build next, you're really trying to watch out for that super excited response that you get from clients or customers when you're putting the product in front of them. The kind of things that are like, when can we sign up for this?
Yes.
Like really palpable, specific desire. You're really looking for that kind of emotional and like, this is really hot for me right now. I really want this. And then you can move into things like willingness to buy. You can have a conversation around pricing and you can get into some brass tacks around that. And I think that those visceral emotional desires, expressions 100%. Of desire, really important to look out for. And that's probably about as much value as I can contribute on that.
Yeah, no, 100%. We are, at some point, we also did, because again, when you're looking at especially a big product, you of course have to think about the MVP, right? So what is the first iteration, first experiment that we put out there, minimum viable product that we can validate our hypothesis with? And then you have to get to those features that make that minimum viable product, which could spiral as well into different discussions, whether or not people find that a unique factor on that product. Is this something unique that you cannot do anywhere, that they will generate that response that you're talking about? And like you said before, oftentimes what people say is not what they actually do. If you put something in front of them and you go, hey, look, I have this app that will tell you what show you should watch next on Netflix instead of scrolling for 35 minutes. They go, oh, I want that. You know what I mean? And then you keep feeding them more information. They want everything. But the reality is you build that and then they just don't download the app because they just don't want another app on their phone. You know what I mean? So that part is very difficult. We've done several types of workshops and, different types of, we also send surveys around to, rate different types of features and usability. How would you use this? And like you say, finding that emotional response, like, oh yeah, I do love this, or yeah, this will be useful. This will be useful. That's not what you want. It's like, this thing is really, really killer for me. I would really love to have this product in my hands versus, oh yeah, I will use that. That's not really what you want. But yeah, we often struggle with that part as well, like finding what product to build next, because there's so many possibilities. And again, the signals come in, like you said, like I really want this product, and then it's about, okay, can we sell it right away without building it, which we have done in the past, and that have worked out really well. But some obviously is easier than others.
I think you want to be really careful around the word like.
Oh,
it's really easy for people to, like you were touching on, right? I like this, I like that.
Yeah.
Sure. You really want the love kind of emotion to come out. And I think the other thing that you want to look for are questions coming back at you.
Yeah.
Like, when is this available? How far through the development or the design are you with this? Will I be able to do A, B, and C with this?
And following up questions, like building up onto the problem. Yeah, 100%.
That's layering and laddering up that excitement.
Yes.
And I think you really do need to then quickly switch into the commercial conversation.
Yeah.
Once you've established there's a desire there, switch into the commercial conversation. And then that's kind of where the rubber meets the road.
Yes.
You've said that you love it and you seem really excited about it. You've expressed a desire, but are you willing to pay for it? And doing it early. I think you probably already know all of this stuff, but doing it early. Before engineering's touched it, right? Ideally.
100%, 100%. Because otherwise then you're burning resources in that front end time. Awesome. Now let me talk about, because one of your latest episodes of your podcast, which by the way, love it. is awesome.
Thank you.
And of course, I'm learning a lot of stuff from just watching you conduct those interviews. Despite of my format being slightly different, I just shoot off the cuff for the most part. You seem very prepared when of course, you're talking to high profile people too. But I'm learning a lot from that. And one of your latest episodes, which I loved with Jacob, was around artificial intelligence and how that is shaping, it's going to and is shaping roles of user experience designers. I use it a lot, and it has helped me tremendously with a bunch of stuff that I used to do. Because we're in a small team, of course, we don't have people like UX writers, right? And I will pull up the product later for you to see, but we have, obviously, it's an analytics product. So you have very complex charts, a button does a particular function, and therefore you need to explicitly show it, what it does in a very concise and simple language. And before we used to do that, and we're not great at that. Like, it's really difficult to do it. And we're using this, for example, artificial intelligence is awesome for that. Literally, you put a bunch of information. This is what this function does. And I need a tooltip UI component. And it just does it immediately. It just saves you so much time analyzing user data for user research. So we have our analytics. Just download a dump. For example, tonight I have an interview. Just download the dump of this user, analyze this data, tell me what pages, what functions does this immediately without you having to do this manually. And I do agree with him in that you just have to integrate this into your workflow and make it part of increasing productivity as a designer, because that is going to separate you from the rest.
Yeah.
How do you see artificial intelligence shaping this UX designer or product design as a whole?
No, now there's a big question. I think we have to acknowledge that it is already shaping design.
Yes.
Like you've just told the story of how it's working with your workflow. I'm certainly using it in mine as well. Like it's greatly helpful for the heavy lift and shift of a lot of the manual work that we're doing. And I think that fundamentally design was already different than it was last year, this year, but it's fundamentally going to be very different in 5 years.
Yeah.
That doesn't make me sweat though.
No, me neither.
It doesn't make me sweat.
It gets me excited, in fact. It gets me very excited because all that, like you said, is the heavy work that at the end of the day, not really the stuff that you want to be spending your time on. And it's just taking that off your hands. But again, it's just, I think the message that he sent through is important, which is, again, you have to be in the front of this. Like, you have to adapt with it, use it in any way you can, and of course, be creative. It's a tool at the end of the day. What is a hammer without the person swinging it? You know what I mean? Like,
his message was start now, because if you don't start now, right now, like
right now,
if you're listening to this, start right now, because if you start right now, then in 5 years' time, you have 5 years' experience. But if you start in 1 year's time, you've only got 4 and someone else has got 5. So there's a little bit of a incentive there, I feel, from a purely competitiveness in the marketplace as designers, or even anyone in any white collar role, probably even in tradespeople can use this as well. I know my stepfather is not a tradesperson, he's an engineer, but he's been experimenting with using these models for engineering calculations. Of course, he double checks everything, but it can speed up everything for everyone. So I think it's a positive evolution. I think there's a lot of fear and hysteria out there around it in certain quarters, and I just don't buy into that. For a start, no one really wears fear particularly well. It's not a good thing to put on every day, and I feel like it's a really exciting period for our industry and for us as practitioners. Of course, there's a dystopian risk there. Will we be the co-pilots or the cabin crew is one of the ways that I've been thinking about this, right? Like, who's actually going to end up flying the plane?
The plane, yeah.
But I think there's enough evidence out there that there's something that these models haven't yet, perhaps never will, be able to crack. There's something innate in the way in which humans think and interact together that it does a pretty good job of imitating at times, but it's not the whole picture, and not yet. So don't lose too much sleep about it.
Have you used any of this technology? Because I've seen, by the way, yeah, let's talk about that for a second. The space in between facilities, because that's actually pretty amazing. The way that you've built that. Have you implemented anything with artificial intelligence in that? Like any particular workflow that you've streamlined on those facilities?
In the physical facility, not so much, but in the data, if you like, that comes out of research sessions for sure. So often what I'll do is I'll look through a session and I'll pull out what I feel are the issues or the behavioral insights into what's happened, what I've seen happen, and I'll frame those observations in the most objective way that I can. And then I'll work with a GPT to help me to generate provocations to a product team or to a design team around how we might solve for the issues that have been observed. And I think that's been a really useful productivity enhancement for just generating those how might we's. Of course, I then review them and make sure that they're actually on point.
Yeah.
But that having that external, it's almost like an external perspective. You know, you can ask these GPTs to assume a persona, like from an ancient philosopher or whatever it is, and you can get them to put that perspective into your process. And I think that's particularly useful for those of us that are working remotely primarily, and we don't always have a colleague, just over our shoulder to get a little bit of external perspective. So I use it in that respect, and I feel it's helped me to sharpen some of the provocations that I put back to product teams about how they might solve for those issues.
Yeah, I didn't think of that actually. Reading onto your observations, but from a different perspective. I'm going to start using that as well. The design of the space in between, like the offering that you're bringing into the market. Because you is there anybody that's doing the same thing as you're doing in New Zealand?
Not that I'm aware of.
I don't think it is, right? What led you to bring in this offer? Like I know we talked about a lot about UX, but we never talked about you. I want to get to know you as well, like your background and what got you to this point and into this position that you are right now, because it's quite outstanding. So I want to learn a little bit more about that journey. How was that like?
Yeah. Where do we start? I think coming back to what you were asking me about earlier around desirability, I suppose I do have firsthand experience in what that's like as a founder creating a product. In this case, it's a physical space for a market, for people. And I launched this lab in February of 2020. And of course, we all know what happened in March of 2020 here in New Zealand, right? And around the world, we got put into lockdown. And so what had led to this is a transition from my agency, also at the time called The Space in Between, which we were designing and building products for other companies, into just focusing specifically on UX research. And I'd done a lot of interviews with people that were in corporate and other product-based companies to try and tease out that desirability for a facility like this. Long story short, COVID comes along. And what happens to all the demand and desire? It disappears overnight. So I certainly have first-hand experience with what it's like to launch something and to have crickets for a good couple of years. Having said that, we have had a number of companies come through and use the facility, and it's always amazing to see people together in the space and the light behind their eyes come on and facilitate those conversations. But as I said, it wasn't the best start to things. It was a little bit rocky, but it's one of those things that I think it just highlights the importance of not taking the future too seriously in your plans and staying agile. I think if at the time I had better mental tools to go for, it would have been a softer landing when COVID arrived. But I know everyone around the world was sort of struggling with confronting whatever they were at the same time. But I certainly am more philosophical now about that decision. Of course, because you're investing in plant and equipment and lease and all of these things. So it was one of those rocky starts, let's say.
Oh, wow. What about previous to that? Tell me a little bit about your background prior to that. So what was your journey before launching in this space in between? Like what do you work on before? How did that you go from working in an agency building product, which is kind of what I'm doing now, to purely focusing on UX research? What led you to make that decision?
I had a child.
You had a child.
Yeah. Well, my wife had a child, I should say. I didn't have the child, but we had our firstborn about 5.5 years ago.
Okay.
And I don't know if anyone listening to this can connect with it, but I got to a point in my career where I'd been solving the same or very similar problems for a good while now. Maybe it was like 12 years or 10 years or something. I think the space in between was about 10 at the time. And I was just bored to death of it.
Right.
You know? Like I'm normally someone who kind of leaps out of bed looking forward to the challenge of the day and really enthusiastic about it. Not kind of Anthony Robbins kind of enthusiastic, but in a Kiwi sense, you know, like pretty happy to be here and pretty happy to do what I'm doing. But I'd lost that. And I started asking myself the question, you know, what's work going to look like in another 10 years if I'm still doing what I'm doing? But what I realized over a G&T, looking over a lovely beach up north here in New Zealand, was that the part that I enjoyed the most out of what I was doing was always the time I spent with users, people who use the software, customers in front of it, and understanding what that experience was like. And then I had this crazy thought, why don't I just double down and do that? And so I made some really significant changes, and I've never looked back.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's definitely a huge hole in the market there in New Zealand as well. Like, you basically also filling that huge gap of that service, just not being here, somebody with your experience just offering those services. I think that's awesome. And like you said, the most important part is that's the part you enjoy the most. I'm also on that. I have friends that have done exactly what you just said, and it's actually fine that you mentioned that they sort of spiral after they have kids too. It's just like, do I wanna be, you know, stressed out about delivering these products and you know hi-fi designs and all this stuff, which is, you know,
it's a confronting moment having a kid, right? Like it forces you to reevaluate life. You know,
I wonder what's gonna happen when I go through that. Because right now, for me, it's like I work in a product that's incredibly complex, in my opinion, and therefore that keeps me on my toes. And I just don't see doing any other thing like that, you know. So that's why it keeps me very excited. There's so much possibilities, and like we were talking about, there's also the learning path that it has opened up for me there in terms of not just being a product designer, but a product manager, product owner of, you know, creating multiple products from scratch, you know, from an idea, taking it all the way to the market, stuff like that. It really excites me.
Just while you're on that, it's reminding me of a conversation I had with Lou Rosenfeld, who some people might know. He runs Rosenfeld Media. They're a big UX conference and publisher. They make a lot of good contributions to the field of UX. He was telling me that there's this idea of a moment prison that he's observed, having been in this industry for, say, 30 or 40 years, where we get really stuck in defining who we are and what we do in a very specific way. And what happens with the passage of time and technology, as we've seen with AI right now, as things change.
Yeah.
And people's identity gets really attached to, I'm a UI designer, or I'm an interaction designer, or I'm a UX designer. And what you're describing is that at the moment, all of these things are somewhat in flux. And Jacob Nielsen talked about this when we spoke. It's this idea of AI helps to act as a forklift for the mind, is what he uses his sort of analogy. And that if you have a certain skill, maybe a UX designer, but you're being asked to do more in product, you can use AI to help you kind of level up to a relatively good level of competence in that other discipline, and it kind of accelerates your learning.
Yeah.
And then that begs the question, what are you? What are you now? You know, are you what's on your, you know, email signature anymore? I was going to say business card, but no one has those anymore. Or are you moving into something different? And I think that's a really interesting idea, this being conscious of, am I in a moment prison here? Am I too closely attached to the status quo? And what am I missing? What opportunities am I not seeing? Or what grief am I causing myself by being too beholden to a particular thing of the past, a particular identity from the past?
That is true. I actually don't look at that at all right now. Like, I've never been attached to like, I am a senior or I'm a lead this or a lead that or whatever. All I care about is what I'm doing right now and what excites me. That's it. And just look at, like, when this opportunity came through, I've never done anything remotely like. I was just a UX designer. My emphasis really has always been visually, so I'm really good UI designer too. But I shift gears into UX a lot because I realized the importance of it at some point. I was like, no, I need to really focus on this. I'm really good at UI. I don't need to do anything in that front, but I need to really level up my game in UX. And then I landed this job, and then that really accelerated that because of the type of product that we had. I had to learn, basics of data science and stuff like that just to try to understand the product. And then, but then when this opportunity came through, a lot of my background is actually in graphic design. I graduated graphic design, so I worked in marketing for a lot of time, and that knowledge has helped me a lot in terms of my ability to bring products into the market with an identity, with an idea, with a why, with a clear sense of why. So yeah, all I see is just path moving, and I just used to adapt to it. And the position at the end of the day, to me, is irrelevant. It's just about the journey that you're on and how you see yourself evolving.
And if you take a 20-year perspective or, an end-of-life perspective, are you really going to be concerned about what your job title was?
Yeah, exactly.
You'll be concerned about whether or not you did great work, not what it was called when you were doing it, and how other people that you worked with felt when they were working with you. The titles that we are called don't matter.
Yeah, exactly. Is UX research, one of my close friends actually moved into UX research fully after, similar path to what I was doing. And I started getting very excited about that for a moment. Actually, you see that book there? You probably read it. Usapalooza?
Yes. Nick
So,
Beaumast.
Yeah. So I got a hold of that book. We went to a talk, actually. He was speaking, and I bought that book. And I started reading it, and I was like, oh, this is very exciting. This is actually something I've never thought. Like, I saw UX research as just a requirement of a UX designer-based knowledge, right?
Yeah.
But as an in-depth field, that book really opened it up for me in terms of everything that there is to know about actually understanding the full picture. And then, of course, when you're designing, when you're a product designer, you have to look at it from the top down, really in a macro level. And that part is just part of the journey. So I would see, I don't know right now, but it's something that definitely probably will come down the line in my life at some point. Might, just like you, just switch gears. But for now, I think the product that we're working on really does excite me. And in fact, that's why I want to talk to people like you to help me elevate my game on that, because I love my job anyway. And I also do other products for other people as well, like freelancing and stuff. So all that knowledge, all that to say that it's exciting times, I think, with all this technology that's coming up. And I think if you're a designer out there, it's really exciting times. Just you have to be in the front of it, use this technology, try different things out. Experiment. I think experimentation is that's actually one thing that facilitates artificial intelligence, the ability to quick iterations of things, experiment, do new projects.
I think that the challenge comes for juniors in the field at the moment, and there's something that comes with time and experience, particularly if you're a reflective practitioner.
Right.
You're thinking about what you're doing, you're looking and thinking critically about what's coming back at you, for example, from a GPT. You have a sensibility that you've built up over time, whether it's visually or whether it's just thinking about problems that you're solving, that you can then critique what it's spitting back out at you. But juniors don't necessarily have that. They don't have that benefit of that experience and that time in the game. And I think it's a really interesting challenge now for those of us that are in positions of mentorship or hiring managers that are bringing on junior people to teams, to understand that they are fundamentally entering a much different workforce and a way of working that we did, say, 10, 15 years ago. And how do we ensure that we're cultivating their sensibility as they progress through their career? Because I think one of the dystopian downsides to AI is people stop thinking critically about what it's giving us. They just accept it because they don't have that experience to think about it critically that they can draw from. Have those hard-fought experiences. So I think that's really interesting to think about from a perspective of the next generation of designers or product people or engineers. Like, how do we ensure that we're actually still thinking really critically about both the input into these GPTs and also what they're giving us back?
Yeah, true. Let me ask you a question. Of course, you've been in leadership position. How has that evolved in your life? Because I'm finding myself in that sort of position now. What are some of the biggest learnings in terms of, you just mentioned one of them, but what else have you learned in terms of being a great leader in the last couple of years?
I've learned that I was a terrible manager.
Right.
Yeah, terrible manager.
Why is that?
That is a good question. I suspect part of it was my age. I started the space in between when I was 26. Now, the age doesn't necessarily have to mean that you're a bad manager, but I didn't have a lot of reference points to draw from. I'd worked in one agency beforehand before I started mine, and my attitude was always, I will, kind of like the Will Smith attitude of, I'm going to just outwork the other guy, and that's how I'm going to succeed. And then I think I touched on that kind of changed when I had my son, and I had to think about a different way of working, different, more rewarding way of being. So I didn't have a lot of great role models.
Okay.
I think I was probably too myopic in the way that I worked with people, probably a little bit harsh and hard, and not particularly empathetic, which I think is something that I've developed more with a bit of time and reflection on some of the things that I did badly or could have done better. But I don't regret any of that. I think if you're listening to this and I once employed you and I did something that I probably shouldn't have, I'm really sorry about that now. I didn't have a great sense of self-awareness, perhaps, that I've worked on a lot in recent years. So I was a really bad manager. And I think I'm okay with that. Like, at the moment, I don't have to manage anyone in a full-time sense. And it has been liberating for me to realize that actually what I love is what I'm doing. And that's being the expert and being that person that can dive deep into something and doesn't necessarily have to consider all of the other dynamics that go along with managing a team and other people. That doesn't mean that I'm a bad leader. It just means the way that I lead, like through the content that I'm putting out and through the talks that I do at conferences and through the work that I do for clients, is different. It's not team leadership. It's self-leadership or expertise in the way that I'm demonstrating that. So it's much more rewarding for me personally. So just tying the bow around this, I feel like people should be asking themselves a question around, what are you actually up for? Like, what do you actually get rewarded for personally? Is it managing other people and helping them to solve their problems and empowering them? Because that's really that's the job of a people leader.
Yeah.
You know, or is it really you honing your own expertise and demonstrating leadership through that? I think the sooner you can realize that in your career, the better, the happier you'll be, the less damage you might do to other people through your career on the way through. And it's just it's a worthwhile question to think about.
Wow. That's a very interesting answer. Yeah, that's cool. I feel like, for example, for me, has been actually the great leaders that I've been across in my career that have really shaped the way I approach that type of role. And I've never sort of seek leadership by any stretch, but I found myself naturally onto those positions now. And I think it's testament to the just great leaders that I've been across throughout my career. And I've been to some terrible ones too, but that's also good because they help you appreciate the other ones. But yeah, I think leadership is something that now I want to really get to learn, because like you said, once you are in that position, it's a responsibility to the people that you are managing. And of course, at the end of the day, it's a key aspect of actually shipping great products. And now, before we finish, I want to talk to you about productivity, because productivity is one of those things that come up everywhere, not just in the field of UX design or product design, but in general. In fact, Future State, the conference, which was, I think, last week, talked a lot about productivity. Of course, we talked about AI and how that helps productivity, but there's other aspects of productivity. From your perspective, because it's so important right now for businesses, what are some key aspects of productivity or hacks that you've sort of discovered throughout your journey? Because you seems like a very focused guy. So I really want to get this out of you because I think that would be really helpful.
Trying to solve a problem once in a way that solves it 1,000 times.
Okay.
And I think that's what I've tried to bring to things like my podcast preparation, things like the way that I work on certain projects. Like I've productized some of the services that I offer so that I can be productive and still achieve the outcome, because the productivity is geared around achieving the outcome.
Yep.
So being really laser focused on how that happens. So my podcast preparation, for example, is the same. Like I've systemized things, and that systemization of whatever it is that I'm doing allows me to not think so much about how to do something, because once I've invested in discovering a way that works for me, then it becomes a question of how do I refine that?
Yeah.
But I'm not making it up every time I go. So if you look at my podcast, for example, it's bespoke in terms of the preparation I put in, but the framework that I have around how I approach that preparation is the same every time, maybe with slight variations over time. So that's the way I think about it. I want to achieve a lot in life, and I can only do that if I put process and system around what I am doing, and so I can do that in the best way possible.
Yeah, efficiency. Yeah, I'm 100% on the same page as you. Like basically spending the time up front so that you get that time back multiple times. If you can definitely see a productivity bonus at the end of that, and then you get your time back, that's a key.
A lot of our time is spent in making decisions, right?
Yeah, 100%.
What are we going to have for dinner tonight? It's one of the reasons why we used to buy those food boxes for dinner.
Oh, right.
Right? Food box turns up. It's got a recipe card. I know what I'm having for dinner on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Easy.
Just one less decision to make.
One less decision to make. And it turns up every week.
Yeah.
You think about the load, the cognitive load that frees up over a year. It's massive.
Yeah.
So if you can think about life in terms of removing all those burdens, those decisions, that time, and then that gives you more time to focus on doing what you love. Yeah. Like what we're doing here.
Yeah. There are a lot of leaders, big leaders. You know how they they talk about Mark Zuckerberg and all these other guys who they dress pretty much the same all the time, and how that's just one less decision to make through imagine their days, how many decisions they have to make. And I remember when I saw that, I thought to myself, that's one decision I'll never make, because I actually enjoy deciding what to wear every day. It's part of my, one of the things I'm excited about is, okay, what am I going to wear tomorrow? Because I love clothes, I love fashion.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was interesting. But the sentiment, it is there. It's one less decision to make. Just productize your life, but make your life more productive by streamlining a lot of processes so that you have to, make less decisions throughout the day. But yeah, productivity seems like a big topic right now across the industry. About how to streamline a lot of processes, a lot of overheads, the things that, probably unnecessary.
Yes, and I think that the focus of productivity has to be really carefully defined. So productivity for productivity's sake is going to help no one. Like this is where you actually remove the joy and the value out of work and product.
Yeah.
So you have to be really keenly focused on the outcome.
The outcome, yeah.
And are we being productive in service of the outcome, or are we just being productive? Because those are very different things.
100%. The presentation from Ian from Slack in future states touched on a lot about these focus times as well, like these no meeting times, which I think are also very important just to reset your mind. A lot of the times I think people like you and me probably have a lot of meetings throughout the day, throughout the week. Having a little bit of time to just focus on one thing is also very important for that.
Speaking of time, there's a wonderful book that I read over the last holidays, which was called 4,000 Weeks.
Okay.
And really 4,000 weeks is 80 years, which is the average human life expectancy, at least in the West, right?
Yeah.
And the reframe that the author, and I can't remember their name, but look it up, 4,000 Weeks, put around time for me was game changing. So I used to be one of these people that would block out every hour of time in my calendar, right? Like sometimes down to 15 minutes for certain tasks. And if you look back through last year's calendar, for example, everything is blocked out.
Wow.
And I got to the end of the year and realized that I was really strung out, like I was trying to get productivity out of every minute of every day because I had so many things to do, and I thought I was doing the right thing. I realized it was the wrong way for me, at least, to do it.
Yeah.
And so now I only have meetings scheduled in my calendar. Everything else is a clear space. Okay. I still run a to-do list in a specific way, somewhat inspired by this book, but I feel so much better. So much better about my relationship with time.
Right.
And I think that's that's one of those things that I think, again, you can invest a lot of critical thinking in and finding what the best relationship for yourself to have with time is, because that's a source of a lot of stress.
Yeah.
Certainly in my career.
Yeah, pretty much micromanaging your own time pretty much to create that stress, and then
because you want to be productive.
It wasn't as productive as you thought.
No.
I guess that comes through experimentation. So you try something out.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You try
right.
something different.
Yeah.
Last thing I want to touch on with you before we wrap up. When we're building products, a lot of the times, of course, business want to build sticky products, what they call sticky products, right? Products that, users actually love using. Everybody wants that. Products that stick. And a lot of the times when you're building these products, you heavily rely on creating habits for users, right? And I remember reading this book, The Power of Habit.
Mm-hmm.
And that really helped me to understand just the human psychology around habits, how to create habits, the whole, cue, routine, rewards, right? When it comes to enterprise product, those rewards are at the end of the outcome, right? Have you worked with any products that, you've developed with this in mind, but consumer facing, where you're taking this, okay, I want to make this product very sticky, which means I have to embed it into these people's life, making part of their routine. Do you have any experience like building a product from that perspective with that in mind?
No, I don't. Most of the work has been around enterprise product where the user doesn't really have a choice as to whether or not they use it. So it's sort of sticky by decree.
Right.
Having said that, though, that almost puts a greater responsibility onto people like you and me as to how we try and create that experience, because we now have someone who has to be compliant in using this tool to do their job.
Right.
And so I focus a lot on when I'm trying to present insights back to product teams, I focus a lot on trying to build that empathy for that person using that product, because they don't have a choice, right?
Right.
It's sticky because they must use the product.
Right.
So I take that quite seriously. It's almost like an ethical level kind of responsibility to try and make sure their life is a little better.
A little bit easier.
A little bit easier. And I think we forget that, there's a lot of focus in what we do around, things that are going to be survivable in the market, because they hit that certain note. And we forget that note that we're trying to hit is actually when we strike a chord with people's emotions or their psychology, or we're actually solving a worthwhile problem. And I think we abstract a lot on top of that. And so I just come back to maybe where I started this conversation, which is it can be as simple as showing someone 30 seconds of someone really struggling with the product, just to have that little bit of those mirror neurons firing, that little bit of empathy.
Actually, let me ask you about this. We have a product that is used, and you probably face this with demographics as well, but in our perspective is like just the user types vary quite drastically. So when you're building a product like ours, where in one end of the spectrum, you got people that are used to using software like Tableau, which is a very complex UIs, and they want to have control of every single element that's plotted onto a graph. So they understand and comprehend user interfaces like that. And in this other side of the spectrum, we have an executive from a streaming platform that is extremely time poor, barely logs into a product, but sees that our software is in the news in Variety. And then he goes, why is everybody talking about this? I want to log in. I want to see what they have. And we have to capture their attention too. So that's sort of like where we are at the moment with this product, where we have to solve for this particular persona, and we have to also think about this persona. But we find sometimes those two things contradict, in that we have to meet in the middle, and we try to simplify the experience for this user so that this doesn't get overwhelmed. Because if you present this interface an interface that's designed for this person or this user, it's not going to fly with this guy.
Yeah.
He's going to find it very overwhelming. Now, what am I looking at? So we usually use that as a North Star to say we fit right in the middle. But oftentimes, again, it's a little bit hard to navigate because this person here who's doing most of the work, like you said, it has to use this product every day. It requires an extra set of functions. So adding an extra button sometimes means taking more cognitive load out of this guy, but adding a benefit or a feature into this side. But the fact that we're building products for very different people, as such, do you have anything like that come through your doors when you have this sort of two demographics? Let's say you're talking Gen Z, and you also have to appeal to older demographics.
Yeah, I think it's probably quite a common tension to have when you're building product, is that you don't just have necessarily one specific persona that you're solving for, right?
Yeah.
I also think that this is probably where the sensibilities that I spoke about before in terms of like a design lead or a product manager really come into play. You can't have your cake and eat it too often because you don't have the time, resource, and the money to do everything for everyone. You often can't build two separate experiences for two personas, right?
Exactly.
So there's compromise, but then there's like compromise in a way that is not to the detriment of either persona. And I think the decision making and the thinking around the compromise is unique in every instance. And I think that relationship between design and product is a really important one to have solid in that respect, because often you're coming at it from quite different perspectives.
Yes.
In this case, you might actually be wearing both of those hats. So you might need to use GPT to kind of give you some
give you a different perspective.
Give you a different perspective.
Yeah. No, that's something that, again, we serve in. And by the way, what I explained just before, there are some actual users that sit right in the middle too. So it's not like we did either this or that, but we have everything in between. But we take that very seriously because of what you said. You compromise the experience of one at the risk of the other. So we do take that quite seriously, and we take, adding an additional button that does X function as something. Is it? Can you achieve that any other way? Can we show it in a different way that doesn't overwhelm the user? You will see when I show you the app, because I want to get your view when you just see it, to navigate through it a little bit, to get me your thought. But you will probably feel that if you're not used to seeing software built for analytics, is that's certainly what I felt when I saw it. I'm like, whoa, what am I looking at? And I'm a designer that's used to doing, working with quite complex interfaces anyway, like Photoshop. And so yeah, that's one thing that we have to, be better at.
This is also one thing where user research is really useful, right? Because you'll have a lot of opinions, and so will other people in the company, about whether or not adding that extra button is a good, bad, or otherwise type of thing. But if you can actually take it right back down to the tasks that either of these personas, or maybe there's multiple, are trying to achieve, can they achieve it or not achieve it? Or if they can achieve it, how difficult is it for them to achieve it? And then you can start having more objective conversations around the benefit or otherwise of adding the extra feature or button. Just bring it right back down to that user experience.
100%. That's what we do, and that's why we use these proto-personas to try to guide us through that thought process. Is like, well, is this person actually going to benefit from this? Like, look at his role, look at what he does, look at the tools that he uses, and that usually makes the decision a lot easier. Let's wrap up. I want to hear from you. What exciting is coming through the pipeline for you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm speaking at Design Outlook 24 over in Melbourne on the 20th of June. So I'm currently working on a conference talk for that. So that's happening. I'm doing a live podcast interview, much like we've been doing here, but there'll be a few hundred people, I suppose, watching.
Wow.
There'll be a first for me. So that's what's coming down the pipe for me.
Oh, that's awesome. And what about with the space in between? Any sort of exciting projects that you're working on? Anything like that?
Yeah. I'm doing a lot of regular work for one of my big clients at the moment, which is good. I'm helping them with a program to quantify the user experience of their product. In fact, there's hundreds of products that they have within their platform. So that's been a really rewarding program to have been involved in. And I'm certainly helping their internal research team to understand the type of work that we've been doing, and so that they can be more efficient and do more of it, and we can have a greater impact on that overall quality of the user experience. And this is coming back to what I was saying about the importance of getting it right for enterprise users because they don't have a choice.
That's true.
So I find that personally really, really rewarding.
Nice. Can you give us the topic of the talk on the Melbourne conference or not?
It's called It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And what I'm doing is giving people a few things. I'm giving them what I believe is a really important question for designers to think about in the current moment, given what's going on with AI and also the economic realities that a lot of people in the design community have been facing lately with a lot of the layoffs that have been going on. I'm also going to give people a tool for more clearly looking at the present and the future so that they can make better judgments around what they're experiencing, what it means, and therefore what to do. And then I'm going to finish with a story that's about my late grandfather, and that is really to give people some confidence that they have whatever they need to face whatever is to come and succeed. Well, what we're put here to do, which is not to wear fear, it's to just get on with things.
Awesome. Well, that sounds like a beautiful, well-stacked way of navigating that presentation. I'm excited. Is that going to be recorded live or? It
will be. And I think I can share who I'm interviewing as well. So it's Felix Lee, who's the CEO or co-founder and CEO of ADP List.
Okay.
So that will come after, and we'll be having a conversation about community. So I suppose the outcome that I'm seeking for the design community who come to listen to that talk is to, like I said, leave with that confidence that they have what it takes, and that together, if we can see the present moment clearly, that we'll be able to more usefully create a future for our field that sees it having a positive future.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for your time, mate. I really appreciate it. And again, I think your podcast is an incredible resource for everybody in the field. So I encourage everybody to go and listen to that. I will definitely, after we finish this, ask you for some tips around the type of guests that you're getting in your podcast are incredible. So I want to talk to you about how you manage to do all of that, of course, with your leadership and the way that you conduct your interviews as well. That's quite amazing. Thanks so much for your time. And I'm looking forward to do another episode with you in the future, I'm sure. And yeah, for everybody who listens to this, thank you very much. Go and follow Brendan with a Brave UX, a space in between. Remember to drink water and exercise, and peace.
See ya.
Thanks, mate. Thanks so much. That's so good.
Welcome to the next level.